Do you have a growing pile of sewing projects abandoned in the naughty pile until you've improved your skills? Do mistakes that get made along the way cause you to yeet the project into the corner, never to be picked up again? Do you get so hooked up on completing every single step of the sewing process to the absolute best of your abilities that you never actually finish anything? Or worse, does it prevent you from ever even starting? Then perfectionism might be ruining your sewing. Hello friends, I'm Shannon Makes, and usually on this channel we have a good time making clothes with varying levels of historical inspiration, but today I think we need to have a chat. So grab yourselves a comforting drink and let's settle in to talk about perfectionism and its place in the sewing studio. This video has been floating around in my head for some time, a culmination of several things I've been seeing online and in my comment section, but it took one particularly nasty comment to really kick this script into reality, so here we are. So maybe we should start out with the question, why do we sew? I feel like for most of us, it's a hobby and an expression of our creativity. For some of us, it's to make unique custom garments that we can't purchase in stores, whether that's just pants with pockets that actually fit your phone, or because standardized sizing has left you frustrated and unable to find clothes that fit properly. Some of us strive to make entire historical outfits as an escape from a mundane and sometimes boring reality. I feel like no matter what your reasons, so many of us start out sewing with an image of this ideal garment that we'd love to make, that we've crafted in our mind's eye. It has all the features we could want or can never find in stores. And then, somewhere along the line, perfectionism steps in, often before we can even cut into the fabric we've picked out, and says, but what if you mess up? What if the reality of the garment you're making falls short of this image you have in your mind? What if you make something and someone judges you on the quality of your workmanship? And these nasty little voices in the back of our minds can sometimes really put a damper on the pleasure that we could be getting from sewing. Perfectionism can manifest in so many different ways, but they're all pretty destructive in the end. We may not want to be judged by others. We may not want to fail at a skill we're unfamiliar with. We might not want to waste that nice, expensive yardage we just bought, or spend our limited free time on a project that might fall short of our expectations. But here's the sneaky secret about perfectionism. It doesn't lead to perfection. Let that sit with you for a second. It doesn't leave you with a perfect garment. More often than not, it probably leads to you avoiding doing any sewing at all for fear of messing up. So many times, perfectionism is a mechanism to protect ourselves from failure, but failure, mistakes, they're all an essential part of the creative process. And here's the catch-22. Fear of failure prevents practice, but practice leads to improvement. Improvement leads to fewer errors. The more you practice, the more you improve your sewing, and the more you can stop making mistakes on the old things and start making mistakes on new things. Because mistakes aren't bad, they're a sign of learning and growth, and they're an inevitable part of the creative process. But there's also another vicious cycle that perfectionism can create. When we're procrastinating on a project, it's often because we've put far too much weight on that one project. Oh, it matters so much. This skirt is so important. There's just too much weight on that garment, which can feed into itself, right? Because if you struggle with perfectionism, it can lead you to procrastinate. It has this paralyzing effect, so then you sew less. You make fewer garments, so each one that you do make feels even more important, which then just makes it even harder to overcome those feelings and actually get started. The more you procrastinate, the more the obstacles you have to overcome grow in size until they're behemoth. There's more you have to overcome, and potentially, if you're sewing for an event, like I know many of us do, there's also a shorter time frame in which to get it done. Now, all types of people struggle with perfectionism, especially creatives. This is very much not a concept that's limited to sewing, but I do feel like we as sewists have additional barriers to overcome, maybe even more so than, say, a writer or a musician, which is that we make physical, tangible things with material goods which cost real money, which again I feel just adds to the weight. It makes those stakes feel even higher because if you mess up, well, it might take hours to undo your mistake. It might mean you have to go recut a new pattern piece, or if you don't have any more fabric, you might have to totally scrap the project or go buy some more. I also feel like so many aspects of garment sewing in particular can really feed the perfectionism monster so well. Look at the fitting process, for example. It involves studying your garment or your mock-up and seeing where it doesn't fit. Looking at where it's wrinkling, where it's pulling, where is there tension that's causing strange lines in the fabric. And eliminating those bulges, wrinkles, and lines help make the garment fit better. But when do you stop? Do you keep going until there's not even a single wrinkle? I've certainly seen plenty of posts online from sewists trying to do just that. Suss out every wrinkle, crinkle, and crease until the garment is perfectly smooth. Well, I hate to break it to you, but if you're sewing clothing, you're never going to have a perfectly smooth, flat garment. The human body is amazing in the range of movements it goes through. If you made a garment that never wrinkled, that would mean it never moved. So congratulations, I guess, you've made the ultimate straitjacket. So it's about striking a balance, and that balance is gonna be different for everyone. We'll talk about some potential ways to bust through your perfectionism in a bit, but for now, let's look at what I'm calling the historical sewing double whammy. As I was thinking about this whole topic, I spent a lot of time considering the ways in which sewists deal with perfectionism compared to other creatives. What are some unique challenges that the sewing community faces? And I think that historical sewists in particular can get kind of hit by a double whammy dose of it. You're exposed to all the other flavors of perfectionism that we talked about, but then you get the added layers of, would this fabric be correct for my time period? And would this stitch have been used in this situation during this time frame? And it feels like it can really pile on quickly. I've seen examples of people getting quite overwhelmed with all the decisions they're trying to make and the degree of historical accuracy they're striving for, to the direct detriment of both their mental health and their sewing. So if you're struggling with this, I'm just gonna remind you that humans in the past were ultimately pretty much the same. They're still just humans. If you're hitting a snag on the reproduction of a specific type of garment and you've thought of a potential solution, but you're asking yourself, but would they really have done that back then? Would this be a historically accurate solution? I'm gonna guarantee you that if you could think of this solution now, they would have thought of it back then. Would it have been the standard way of making that specific piece of clothing? Maybe not. Maybe there was no standard way. But even if there was, there have always been exceptions. Having examined some extant garments myself, I'm telling you, if you gave 10 Victorian seamstresses the same fabric and told them to make the same garment, let's say this dress here, you'd get 10 dresses that looked virtually the same at first glance, but upon inspection, I guarantee you the details would vary from which stitches were used where to what order of operations each seamstress chose. So if historical accuracy is your jam, Godspeed to you on your journey, but if perfectionism is hampering that journey, I encourage you to keep some of this in mind. And if you'd like a deeper dive into perfectionism as it relates to historical sewing specifically, Snappy Dragon has a video up on her channel entirely dedicated to the topic, so I definitely recommend checking that out, and I'll link it in the description. So why do we struggle so much with perfectionism, and what are some negative contributing factors? I feel like there are about a million different reasons, so I'd just like to focus on a couple. First of all, unpopular opinion, but can we take a sec to talk about institutional knowledge and how I feel like it's legitimately doing more harm than good in so many cases I see specifically related to sewing? Institutional knowledge, while it can be absolutely great, often comes with the mindset that there is one proper way to do things and that either implicitly or explicitly all other ways are inferior. Part of the requirement to passing your courses is learning the best or preferred way to do something, often to the detriment of all the other ways of doing it, which sounds like the absolute opposite of creativity. Not to mention that there are about 1 million ways to sew and achieve beautiful results. But it's not the knowledge in and of itself that's the problem. It's when people take that knowledge that they've gained and use it to make others feel inferior or insufficient in their own sewing. I know from my comments and DMs that some of you have firsthand experience with this. And to paraphrase one such conversation, design programs can have so many applicants that they need to weed out those who can cut it from those who can't. And the end result is often that we lose so many sewists and that those who do survive can perpetuate toxic ideas. I'm not going to dwell on this too much because I did not attend design school or sewing classes myself, and I don't think a lot of you have either, but generally speaking, rigid thinking often comes at the detriment of creative problem solving and thinking outside the box. And when you're sewing, a healthy dose of both can go a long way towards making the experience smoother and more enjoyable. Now, we might not have gone to a real design school, but many of us are devoted students at YouTube University, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's a wonderful resource, but as an untenured professor of the institution myself, allow me to say that while it's a great resource, I've also literally seen the negative impact it can have on many viewers' sewing journeys. I am 100% for teaching yourself all you want to learn online if that's the method that works for you, but I also want you to remember that what you're seeing is a highly curated, often even idealized version of sewing. Creators choose which aspects of the process to highlight or literally how to frame the project, and they refine that image even more in the editing room. I actually have an entire video next week on how I film my videos and craft my sewing stories, so if you want to understand in a bit more depth what I'm talking about, be sure to come back and check that out. But even me, I get so many compliments on how realistic and down to earth my sewing is, how nice it is that I show my mistakes, which, don't get me wrong, I greatly appreciate everyone's kind words, and it also just blows my mind because I'm only showing you a tiny amount of the mistakes I make in any one project. There's so much that doesn't make the cut that you as the viewer don't see. When I had to sew the same seam 4 times because I was hungry but refused to take a break and consequently found 4 unique and creative ways to attach panels in not the right way. Or something as mundane as drawing a nice, smooth chalk line because it looks better on camera or it works better with the music, when in reality, when the camera's not running, I'm sitting there hunched over, chicken scratching my chalk across my fabric to get it to mark properly. Plus, then there's also the fact that for many of the larger creators you're watching, making beautiful garments is literally their job. They can afford to buy tons of yardage of really expensive fabric or dedicate entire weeks or months of sewing 8 hours a day to create stunning garments because that's their job. Now, this is not to knock any of those creators. It's not their fault that they're successful at what they do, and it can be super entertaining to watch the videos they make. It's just to make sure that we're watching with a healthy framework and mindset. So please, please don't ever compare yourself and your project and your creativity to someone or something you see online. Everyone is at a different stage in their sewing journey. Everyone has different strengths and weaknesses. We as creators just have a better ability to hide our wonky stitches out of frame or through some careful editing. Which is kind of to say that comparison is the theft of joy. Whether it's your favorite creators on YouTube or your top accounts on Instagram, you're always going to be seeing a highly curated view of the hobby, and that's just not healthy, especially if you're both a perfectionist and prone to comparing your work to that of others. Staying focused on your own unique sewing journey is, I think, one of the most useful and universal pieces of advice I can give to help recovering perfectionists move forwards. So what do we do? How do we prevent perfectionism from paralyzing us in our sewing journey? I don't have a perfect answer for you. I don't think there is a perfect answer out there. Everyone is different, and so I can give some thoughts, some ideas, but in the end, they might not work for you, especially if you're neurodivergent. These might be some very unspicy solutions, so I apologize. Please feel free to throw your own solutions for tackling perfectionism in the comment section, especially if you are neurodivergent. I would love to continue the conversation down there with some perspectives other than my own. But for now, here are some suggestions, and inevitably some will be a better fit for you than others, so feel free to cherry pick. This one I feel like is more universal than many of the other ones, and it's doing some self-examination and introspection. Taking some time to reflect on these specific ways that perfectionism is impeding your sewing progress, and then also understanding why. Once you have a good understanding of the underlying causes, you're going to be better suited to choose solutions that work for you. Go dig around in your closet for some of your ready-to-wear clothes. Even if you sew a lot, I'm betting most of you still have at least some off-the-shelf items. Go choose your favorites, the one you've worn to death, and then examine them closely. I'd be shocked if you didn't find at least one significant flaw, whether that's wonky stitching, mismatched seams, mismatched patterns, or shortcuts in the sewing process. Remind yourself that despite their army of industrial machinery and endless supply of labor, ready-to-wear clothes, even those that you love and have worn to death, aren't perfect. If you're into historical sewing, take some time to examine the extant garments. Obviously, in person is the most interesting and hands-on way to do that, but there are some online resources that will let you get looks at the insides of old garments. They're not perfect either. I can't speak on every era, but it's well documented that the inside of Victorian garments are often an absolute mess. The outside might have been on point, but there was no time to waste finishing off seams on the interior. Often edges were left raw, or at most given a quick overstitch cast that we might even be tempted to call sloppy. So let's stop idealizing these garments and realize that there's a little bit of imperfection in everything out there. Strive for progress, not perfection. Again, this comes back to focusing on your own sewing journey and not comparing that to anyone else's. You could try keeping a sewing journal where you document your projects and what new techniques you tried. This can be great to look back on previous projects and realize that what seemed like a daunting new technique before is now something you're very comfortable with. If a physical journal just isn't your thing, or you know it's unsustainable, maybe try leaving yourself voice memos. Maybe starting a blog and using your viewers as accountability buddies is the format that works for you. Whatever setup you use, try tracking what you did well, areas you'd like to improve on, things you learned. Maybe, and this can be a fun one to keep track of, what mistakes did you almost make but avoid? Even if you don't keep a journal, try to focus not on perfection as the end goal, but rather progress or improvement. Some of my commenters even called it excellence. And remember that progress looks different for everyone too. Some people might view improvement as continually adding new techniques to their sewing arsenal, while for others that might mean using the same tried and true techniques, but just getting more and more comfortable with them. When I was preparing this script, I took a poll on my community page, and a lot of you responded and mentioned Retro Claude's Good, Better, Best system as really having helped you in your own sewing projects. I highly recommend you give her whole video a watch, but to give the briefest of summaries, she plans her project using a good, better, best system with flexible goals that prioritize the most important aspects of a project, and by doing so, she reshapes the planning and creative process to be less about compromise and more about bonus extras if time, budget, or spoons allow. I know it's not what you want to hear, and I agree that it's not ideal, but mistakes are an inevitable part of the sewing process. They will happen, and it doesn't mean you're a bad sewist or a failure. It just means that you're learning and improving, and we're all constantly learning. If you have it in the back of your mind that you'll eventually reach a point where you're so good you'll stop making mistakes, I hate to break it to you, but that's not really a thing. Sewing is so vast. There simply isn't a day when there's nothing left to learn, no new techniques to try or skills to conquer. There will always be new things to try, and with trial comes failure. Plus, let's be honest, even if you're sewing 1000% inside your comfort zone, you're still gonna make some mistakes. You're still gonna set a sleeve wrong or cut 2 lefts instead of a left and a right. I have been sewing for a long time now, and while my general speed and ease has improved vastly since I started, I definitely still mess up all the time. I still have to go back and unpick stitches or redo complete sections, but I don't let that stop me. And because I don't let the idea of perfection get in my path, I now have more experience under my belt that helps me make at least slightly fewer mistakes and to come up with more creative solutions to get myself out of all the silly corners I sew myself into. So instead of avoiding mistakes, let's just try and make newer, bigger, funner mistakes on cooler projects. Now, all this talk of letting go of perfectionism is not to say that you need to rush through your sewing either, with little care for fit or function. Again, hello nuance. If you go so fast that you end up with a garment that you won't wear, that's not necessarily better. So, where is that middle ground? Can you strike a balance with a garment that you'll wear and a creative process that you enjoy, but that doesn't get completely stalled out in the quest for perfection? Here is where knowing yourself and what works for you is once again so important. For some of you, the pleasure you get from sewing is directly derived from the level of precision and the amount of time that you put into it. For you, a slow and well planned out sewing process is what gives you the most pleasure, and so the level of excellence that you strive for should accommodate that. On the other hand, if you know you have a tendency for projects to stall out midway through, then maybe you decide that you need to blow through a project, even if it means rushing a little, because the hit of dopamine that you get from actually finishing something is the ultimate goal, and your idea of excellence should reflect that. We are all different, and I can't offer a one-size-fits-all solution, but I do think it comes down to knowing yourself and your goals, allowing yourself some compassion, and reflecting on your own sewing journey, not that of anyone else's. Perfectionism can be an asset and it can be a giant liability, and it all comes down to who you are and how you handle it. If you want to call yourself a perfectionist and it doesn't negatively affect you, you keep that desire limited to your own sewing and please don't, project it on other people's creative endeavors, then more power to you, and I love that it works for you. But if the mantle of perfectionism feels more like a weight around your shoulders that's dragging you down and getting in the way of your creative journey, if you're feeling mired in the quest for the perfect fit, perfect stitches, the perfect garment, then maybe it's time to shrug off that mantle and try some reframing of that notion. Just because you're not striving for perfection doesn't mean you can't or won't make beautiful things. In fact, it's the opposite. The more you make things, the more your skills will improve, and the more you can make your projects look exactly like that garment you had in your mind's eye. Perfect garments aren't possible. It doesn't happen. All throughout history, from the earliest known garments to the ready-to-wear clothing that we can buy off the shelf today, none of it is perfect. But if you want to improve your sewing, the best way is to practice, to accept that mistakes will be made, and to accept them as part of the learning process. Take steps to minimize the damage of those mistakes when you can, and then just pick up and carry on, bringing with you the lessons you learned. If you have something to add to this discussion, whether it's your own methods for coping with perfectionism, words of encouragement for others, or you just want to vent about how your current project is completely stalled out due to perfectionism, please let's carry the discussion on down in the comments. Keep it thoughtful, keep it kind. Remember, we're all very different and struggling in our own ways with our own creative journeys, and let's bring some compassion and love into the comments we leave. Thank you so much for watching. Lists of the videos I mentioned, plus some extra videos that I enjoy on the topic, will be down in the description. And as my parting gift, after a bit of a heavy topic, here's some footage of Canelle on her tiny corgi-sized painting couch.